Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Picture yourself here for a moment. You've been trapped in a train car for days, squeezed in with 80 other souls, packed so tight that drawing a full breath feels like a luxury. The air is heavy with fear, thick enough to taste. 4 days now, you've been clinging to a fragile hope, whispering to yourself that maybe, just maybe, you're headed to a factory, some kind of work camp, anywhere but the place everyone's too terrified to name out loud. Then the train begins to slow. Through the grime-streaked window, a sign slides into view. Just one word: Auschwitz. Every heart in that car stops beating. That name means only one thing to everyone: gas chambers, crematoriums, death on an industrial scale. They push you off the train, shouting, forcing you into 2 lines. Men here, women there. There's an SS officer standing casually, almost bored, and he's pointing with a single finger, right or left. Nobody understands what this finger game really means, but a rumor ripples through the line like electricity. Right means you can work. Left, well, that's for anyone who looks sick or weak. The man with the pointing finger, the one playing God with a casual gesture, is Dr. Josef Mengele. And standing before him, trying desperately to look sharp and capable, is a young psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl. Mengele pauses, rests his hands on Frankl's shoulders, and slowly, almost thoughtfully, turns him to the right. Later, Frankl discovers that 90% of his transport went left. Within hours they were gone. His friend, his colleagues vanished. When he asked a veteran prisoner where they were, the man just pointed at a chimney belching flame into the gray Polish sky. "That's where your friend is," he said flatly, "floating up to heaven. This is where our journey begins today." Not with some philosopher pondering life from a cozy armchair, but with a man standing at the absolute bottom of human suffering. The book we're diving into, Man's Search for Meaning, was born in that hell. It sold over 12 million copies worldwide and been called one of the 10 most influential books in America. Its author, Viktor Frankl, was a brilliant psychiatrist before the war, someone who chose to stay in Vienna with his elderly parents even though he had a visa to escape to America. He paid dearly for that choice, losing his parents, his brother, and his pregnant wife in the camps. And yet somehow, the book he wrote isn't drowning in despair. It's actually one of the most powerful testaments to hope ever put on paper. It tackles a question that haunts all of us at some point. How do you find meaning when everything's been stripped away? How do you say yes to life when you're facing suffering that seems impossible to bear? Stay with me here, because by the time we're done, you'll understand the one freedom that absolutely nobody can take from you, no matter what. You'll discover the secret that allowed people to walk into gas chambers with dignity intact, and you'll learn how to apply that same insight to find unshakable meaning in your own life, right where you are. The moment Viktor Frankl stepped into Auschwitz, they started the process of erasing him. Every possession was confiscated. His head was shaved clean, every hair on his body removed. His name was replaced with a number, 119-104, burned into his skin with ink. But the loss that cut deepest for him was a manuscript tucked in his coat pocket. His life's work, the book meant to introduce his revolutionary ideas about psychotherapy. He tried desperately to explain its importance to a veteran prisoner, pleading to keep just that one thing. The man's face twisted into something between pity and mockery, and he roared a single word that shattered Frankl's last connection to who he used to be: "Shit!" In that instant, Frankl said, "I struck out my whole former life." The first psychological phase had kicked in: shock. Here's something strange about the human mind. Frankl noticed that when facing absolute horror, many prisoners experienced what he called a, quote, a delusion of reprieve. They'd see other prisoners who looked reasonably healthy and convince themselves things couldn't be that bad. They couldn't grasp the reality yet. That first night, being herded into showers, some actually felt relief when real water came out. At least it wasn't gas. This, Frankl explains, is how our minds protect us from horrors too big to comprehend. You watch your own suffering like you're observing a film, detached, oddly curious. But shock couldn't last forever. As days melted into weeks, it gave way to the second phase, apathy, a kind of emotional death. This wasn't laziness or giving up. It was survival armor. Imagine standing in freezing cold for roll call. You hear screaming. Some poor soul gets knocked down, dragged up, knocked down again, just for trying to reach sickbay at the wrong time. The first time you witness this, you're horrified, you look away. A few weeks later, you don't even blink. You watch, completely unmoved, as prisoners swarm a still warm corpse to steal his potato scraps or worn-out shoes. The daily beatings, the crushing injustice, the constant shadow of death, it all becomes numbingly normal. Disgust, pity, horror, these are luxuries you simply can't afford anymore. Life shrinks down to one primitive focus: staying alive. Keeping yourself and maybe the guy next to you breathing. The prisoners didn't dream about freedom or revenge. They dreamed about bread, cake, warm baths. Their whispered conversations in the frozen trenches were about favorite recipes and meals they'd cook when they finally got home. Frankl remembers one night hearing a prisoner groaning through a nightmare. He reached out to wake him, then froze with a terrible realization. Whatever nightmare he was having couldn't possibly be as bad as the reality he'd wake up to. This is where most survival stories would end, humans reduced to their most basic animal instincts. But this is where Frankl's story actually takes off. Because what he discovered, in himself and others, was that even in this degradation, something else was possible. A deeper, richer inner life could actually flourish. He writes that sensitive people, those accustomed to intellectual and spiritual pursuits, often suffered more physically, but the damage to their inner selves was actually less. They could retreat from the horror around them into a world of inner richness and spiritual freedom. How did they manage this? Frankl identified 3 powerful sources of meaning that became lifelines in the darkness. The first was love. One morning, stumbling through darkness and icy wind on a brutal march to the worksite, someone next to him whispered, "If our wives could see us now." That single thought sparked an image of Frankl's own wife in his mind. He saw her with startling clarity, her smile, the encouraging look in her eyes. He began having a silent conversation with her, and suddenly a profound truth hit him. He writes, "For the first time in my life, I saw the truth. The salvation of man is through love and in love." He understood that someone who has absolutely nothing left in this world can still experience a moment of pure joy in the contemplation of their beloved. He didn't even know if his wife was alive, and as it turned out, she wasn't, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Love, he realized, transcends the physical person. It reaches into their spiritual being, their innermost self. In the bleakest moment imaginable, his inner life, his connection to his wife's essence, felt more real and luminous than the suffering crushing him. The second source of meaning was finding beauty in nature and art. It sounds almost impossible, but even in the camps, moments of profound beauty could break through. Frankl describes a journey from Auschwitz to another camp, These prisoners, who'd given up all hope, were crammed in a carriage, peering through tiny barred windows. When they passed the mountains of Salzburg, their peaks glowing in the sunset, they were completely captivated by beauty they'd been starved of for so long. One evening, a fellow prisoner rushed into their mud hut, breathlessly urging everyone outside to see the sunset. They stood there in silence, watching the sky come alive with clouds shifting through impossible colors, steel blue to blood red, all reflected in the muddy puddles at their feet. One prisoner turned to another and said quietly, "How beautiful the world could be. Even a simple song could throw a lifeline. Sometimes there'd be a makeshift cabaret in the evening. Other times, someone would sing Italian arias during lunch break, and for a few precious minutes, everyone would forget their hunger and exhaustion, transported by the music." These weren't just distractions. They were acts of spiritual resistance, reminders that a world of beauty, art, and human dignity still existed beyond the barbed wire, and that a piece of that world could live inside them. The third source of meaning, surprisingly, was humor. Humor, Frankl insists, was another weapon in the soul's fight for survival. More than anything, it creates a sense of detachment, an ability to rise above your situation, even just for seconds. He and a friend made a pact to invent at least one funny story each day, imagining absurd situations after liberation. Like his friend, a surgeon, being back in an operating room when someone bursts in shouting, "Action! Action!" the same command the guards screamed to make them work faster. This wasn't about denying the suffering. It was about mastering the art of living, even in a concentration camp. Frankl compares suffering to gas. If you pump gas into a chamber, it fills the entire space, whether the chamber is huge or tiny. Suffering works the same way, filling the human soul completely, whether the suffering is massive or small. That's why the size of suffering is relative. And because of this, tiny mercies can bring enormous joy. The prisoners actually performed a dance of joy in the train car when they realized they were headed only to Dachau, not the dreaded Mauthausen. Why? Because they'd heard Dachau didn't have gas chambers. The relativity of their suffering made this small mercy feel like winning the lottery. Love, beauty, and humor were all lifelines. But they point to something deeper, more fundamental, which is really the beating heart of this book. Frankl realized that while the Nazis could control everything around him, steal his possessions, starve his body, murder his family, there was one thing they could never touch. He writes what's probably the most famous line in the book: "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." This wasn't just theory. He witnessed it in action. He remembers men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They were rare, sure, but they were living proof that you could resist apathy and push back irritability. They proved that a human being can hold on to spiritual freedom and independence of mind, even under crushing physical and psychological stress. Every single day, every hour offered a choice, a decision about whether you'd submit to the forces trying to rob you of your inner self. Would you become just another typical inmate, shaped entirely by circumstance, or would you somehow retain your human dignity? The kind of person a prisoner became, Frankl concluded, was the result of inner decisions, not just what the camp did to them. This profound insight became the foundation for the psychotherapy approach he'd later create, logotherapy. Logos is Greek for meaning, and logotherapy is built on a simple but revolutionary premise. The primary driving force in humans isn't chasing pleasure like Freud thought or grabbing power as Adler taught. It's the pursuit of meaning. Our deepest need is what Frankl calls a will to meaning. In the camps, this was literally life or death. A prisoner who lost faith in the future was doomed. Once they couldn't see a goal anymore, a why for their existence, they'd decline mentally and physically, fast. Frankl tells this haunting story about a block warden, a famous composer, who confided about a dream he'd had. A voice told him the war would be over for him on March 30th. He was filled with hope. But as the date approached, the war news looked terrible. On March 29th, he got sick with high fever. On March 30th, he became delirious. March 31st, he was dead. His loss of hope, that crushing disappointment, lowered his body's resistance to a latent typhus infection, and it killed him. This story perfectly captures the book's central wisdom, a quote from philosopher Nietzsche that Frankl keeps returning to. "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how." The crucial task for anyone, whether trapped in a concentration camp or comfortable in modern life, is finding their why. This led Frankl to a fundamental perspective shift. We're so used to asking, "What can I expect from life?" We feel like life owes us happiness, success, comfort. But Frankl says we've got the question completely backward. We need to stop asking about the meaning of life, and instead see ourselves as the ones being questioned by life. Constantly, daily, hourly, life is asking us what we're going to do. Our answer can't be found in thinking and meditating. It has to be in right action and right conduct. So how do we answer? Where do we find this meaning life is demanding from us? Frankl outlines 3 primary paths. First, by creating something or doing something meaningful. This is the most straightforward. Finding meaning through achievement, building something, creating art, contributing through your work. Frankl himself found his why in his burning desire to reconstruct that lost manuscript. Second, by experiencing something, or truly encountering someone. This is the path of love, beauty, and truth. Meaning can be found appreciating that sunset the prisoners watched, or loving another person in their absolute uniqueness. Love, Frankl says, is the only way to truly grasp another person's innermost core. But the third path is the most profound and most relevant to his experience. We can find meaning in the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. When we face a situation we can't change, an incurable disease, losing someone we love, being imprisoned, we're challenged to change ourselves. Suffering itself is meaningless, but we give it meaning by how we respond to it. We can remain brave, dignified, unselfish. Or in the desperate fight for survival, we can forget our humanity and become no better than animals. In that choice lies our ultimate freedom. Frankl tells this beautiful story from his practice after the war. An elderly doctor came to him severely depressed 2 years after his wife died. Frankl didn't offer platitudes. Instead, he asked a question. "What would have happened, doctor, if you had died first, and your wife had to survive you?" The doctor replied, "Oh, for her this would have been terrible, how she would have suffered." Frankl gently said, "You see, doctor, such suffering has been spared her, and it is you who have spared her this suffering, at the price that now you have to survive and mourn her." The doctor said nothing, shook Frankl's hand, and quietly left. His suffering hadn't disappeared, but his attitude toward it had transformed completely. It now had meaning. It was a sacrifice for the person he loved. As Frankl writes, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. This journey through the 3 phases of camp life, shock, apathy, and eventually rediscovering an inner life, reaches its conclusion in the 3rd and final stage, the psychology after liberation. You'd think the moment of freedom would be pure, explosive joy. It wasn't. When the camp gates finally opened, prisoners walked out timidly. They saw meadows full of flowers, but felt nothing about them. Frankl says they'd, quote, literally lost the ability to feel pleased, and had to relearn it slowly. He calls this depersonalization. For years they'd dreamed of freedom, but now that it was real, they couldn't grasp it. It felt like a dream they'd soon be jolted from by a whistle blast. As feeling slowly crept back, it brought two new dangers threatening the character of liberated prisoners. First was bitterness. Returning home, they were often met with empty phrases, "We didn't know about it," or "We suffered too." This superficiality was infuriating. The second danger was disillusionment, not caused by other people, but by fate itself. Someone who thought they'd reached the absolute limit of suffering discovered that suffering has no limits. For years they'd held on to the image of a loved one waiting for them. That image gave them the courage to endure. But what happened when they got home and found that person no longer existed? Woe to anyone whose dream day turned out so different from what they'd longed for. And yet, for those who made it through this final trial, there came a crowning experience. The wonderful feeling that after everything they'd suffered, there was nothing left to fear anymore, except God. They'd walked through the deepest hell and emerged on the other side. They were, finally and truly, free. It's hard to talk about a book like Man's Search for Meaning without feeling a little humbled. It's more than just a book. It's a testament to what the human spirit can actually endure and transcend. In today's world, so obsessed with pursuing happiness and avoiding discomfort at all costs, Viktor Frankl's message feels more radical and necessary than ever. He teaches us that meaning isn't found in a life without suffering. Meaning is what we forge in spite of suffering, through it, because of it. It's not something we stumble upon, like finding lost keys. It's something we build, moment by moment, through the choices we make and the attitudes we adopt. The most powerful lesson for me is that fundamental perspective shift he demands. We spend so much energy asking, what will make me happy? What can I get out of this situation? What does life have in store for me? Frankl completely flips that. He says the question isn't what we expect from life, but what life expects from us. Think about that for a second. It reframes every single challenge. That difficult class isn't just an obstacle to suffer through. It's life asking you, can you be disciplined? Can you push yourself to learn? A conflict with a friend isn't just a problem. It's life asking, can you be compassionate? Can you forgive? Even a moment of unavoidable frustration, like being stuck in traffic, isn't just annoying. It's life asking, can you be patient? Frankl's wisdom isn't just for the grand, tragic moments. It's for the everyday grind. And that's where we can start practicing it. Here are a few simple ways to bring his lessons into your life, starting right now. First, practice the reframe. Next time you face some small, unavoidable frustration, a canceled plan, a long line, a computer crash, catch yourself before you spiral into anger. Take a breath and ask that Franklian question. What is this situation asking of me right now? Maybe it's asking for patience, maybe creativity to find a different solution. By choosing your attitude, you reclaim your power. You turn a moment of suffering into a moment of strength. Second, identify your why. What actually gives your life meaning? Frankl showed that having a future goal is essential for psychological survival. Take 5 minutes and write down 1 to 3 things that serve as your why. Is it a person you love and feel responsible for? A creative project you're passionate about finishing? A value, like kindness or justice, that you want to bring into the world? This isn't about having your whole life figured out. It's about having an anchor. When the how of life gets brutal, when you're exhausted or discouraged, that why is what pulls you through. Finally, perform a self-transcendent act. Frankl taught that true meaning emerges when we forget ourselves and direct our attention outward, to a cause to serve or another person to love. So today, do one small thing for someone else with zero expectation of getting anything back. It could be as simple as truly listening to a friend without interrupting, helping a family member with a chore without being asked, or offering a genuine compliment to a stranger. In that small act of giving, you'll taste the profound meaning Frankl is talking about. Viktor Frankl's life proves his ideas aren't just elegant theories. He lived them. He chose to find meaning in his suffering, to help his fellow prisoners, and to dedicate his life after the camps to healing others' souls. He reminds us that humanity isn't just the species that invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. We're also the species that entered those chambers upright, with prayers on our lips. We all have both potentials within us, the swine and the saint. Which one we become depends not on our conditions, but on our decisions. The ultimate message of this book is one of defiant hope. It's a declaration that even in the darkest night, we hold a flicker of light in our hands, the last of the human freedoms, the freedom to choose our way, and in that choice lies our meaning. That was the book summary of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. We've covered the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic happens when you read the book yourself. It's in those quiet moments when a particular story or a simple phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, grab a copy, because reading it isn't just learning, it's an experience that can genuinely change how you see yourself and your daily life. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next journey into another life-changing book in Billionaire's Bookshelf. Let's keep growing.